This is The Competitive Edge with Ross Tucker. Welcome to The Competitive Edge. My name is Scott Britton, and I'm here to help you answer a question that we all have. How can I get an edge in my business and life? Each week, we're going to uncover how some of the most successful and inspiring entrepreneurs, entertainers, and thought leaders get an edge, so you too can reach your full potential. Thanks for tuning in today. Now let's get started. What's up, Competitive Edge listeners? I hope you're having a rocking day. I'm feeling pretty good over here. Today's guest is someone whose picture I used to look at on a regular basis in college. And no, I'm not talking about Jessica Alba. Today we have Ross Tucker on the show. I share a bond with Ross and that we both were fortunate enough to play football for Princeton. The only difference is that Ross went on to play in the NFL for 7 years after making the Washington Redskins as an undrafted free agent. Since his days on the gridiron, Ross has went on to have a successful career as a media personality with his own NFL radio show on Sirius, as a studio analyst on NBC Sports, and even does color commentary on the Yes Network. Ross is also an entrepreneur with his software company Go Big Recruiting that provides collegiate recruiting solutions for high school athletes, and he has a badass podcast, the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Definitely recommend checking that out. So, NFL, entrepreneur, NFL broadcaster. The bottom line is that Ross is the type of guy who takes control of his life and maximizes every opportunity that comes his way. In this conversation, Ross is going to share with us how he's been able to make the most out of the chances that he's gotten through each stage of his life, and even share some inspiring stories that illustrate exactly how he's been able to do that. Let's go ahead and hear from Ross Tucker. Ross, what is up, man?
Scott, good. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to know that there's some fellow Tigers in the podcast world.
Yeah, dude. Well, I've been watching you from afar and am really excited to have you on here today to talk about just some of the many different things that you've done, man. And between making it to the NFL, playing for 7 years, being a commentator, starting a successful business, I think an underlying theme here that I'd love to talk with you about today is being an underdog, man. Would you characterize yourself in your career as an underdog?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on some level, some people I think would laugh at that. They'd be like, wait a minute, the guy that went to Princeton, played in the NFL, yeah, he's really an underdog in life. He's really having a rough go of it so far. And I can appreciate that. And I've had people, express that to me before. And I think I recognize, how fortunate I am with some of the God-given gifts that I've got. But I think if you really know the story, the entire story, you would know that I absolutely am an underdog, in the sense that, my dad is 5'9", 170 pounds. I did not play very much the first couple games when I was in 10th grade of, high school football. I certainly never, ever, ever had visions or thoughts that I would be a professional football player. I never really even dreamed that big, to be honest with you. I just felt incredibly happy and fortunate that, the combination of my physical gifts and the hard work I'd put in allowed me to go to a school like Princeton because of football. So that was number one, that there's no question, late bloomer, did not think, with my dad's size that I'd have this ability. Then you go to Princeton, and not a lot of guys that make the NFL from the Ivy League as an undrafted guy to make it with the Redskins in 2001. It's like that Eminem song. I had one opportunity, I made the most of it, but I also think it's fair to say along the line that I was thrust into some pretty good opportunities. I think that's an important thing to mention as well, Scott. 10th grade, I didn't play the first couple games, and then the senior offensive tackle got hurt, and then I went in. And I think that's part of the reason why I was able to have so much success the next year is because I got to play some in 10th grade. And at Princeton, I go there, and again, the guy in front of me got hurt, and that helped me. And then in the NFL, I had a good opportunity to be able to go to a team like the Washington Redskins that had salary cap issues, big-time salary cap issues, and they were looking to keep some undrafted free agents. So that was really a bonus for me as well. So, you know, if you look at it, I think, yes, underdog for sure, but I also think, you know, good fortune. But, you know, most people you talk to that have had success, there's good fortune at some point along the line.
So, man, yeah, I totally hear you, and it's awesome to hear that you're so self-aware of just the fact that you've been given some really cool opportunities. At the same time, though, let's be real, man. I mean, I played Ivy League ball. I know how hard it is to get on the field there, let alone the NFL. And you were put into a situation where there isn't exactly a tradition of people getting these opportunities, right? You probably had a lot of doubters. And what I'd love to know is, you know, in these instances where you know that you could make or break your career, that your ability to potentially play football for the rest of your life was contingent upon these small windows and how you performed in there. What were the type of mindsets and things that you told yourself and things you did to prepare for these situations in order to maximize these opportunities?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was probably unique as far as kids go. I started at a very young age, sort of developing what I was going to be all about. And I had an older sister, and, you know, she was 4 years older, and I remember she was friends with a lot of guys in the high school football team. And after their high school careers were over and they were done, they just expressed a lot of remorse and regret. I mean, and really they were just reflecting back on what a wonderful experience high school football had been for them, and how much they were going to miss it, and how they wish they had put more time in. I came away from that thinking that I was not going to do that. You know, I mean, in 8th grade I was 5'6", 150, chubby, but I remember distinctly thinking, I am not going to do that. You know, football is my favorite thing in the world. When I'm a senior, I am not going to be saying I wish I had put more time in. So, again, not really knowing what my physical gifts would end up being, I decided at a really early age that I was going to have no regrets. I was going to, when football was over for me, whenever that was, at the time thinking it'd probably be high school, that I was going to be able to move on with the rest of my life, knowing that I was the very best I could possibly be and my favorite thing in the world to do. And I think that's very important, and I think that's very powerful, and something that not a lot of people in life can say. And even to this day, my career was what it was, and I don't have any regrets. I did everything I possibly could to be the best player I could. I spent an inordinate amount of time growing up in high school, college. I mean, Scott, I was the type of kid that my parents used to tell me that they wanted me to get some other interests. I mean, my parents were concerned that I was too focused. I don't think you hear that very often from parents, but that they just felt like I needed to diversify my interests a little bit, to get into some other things, but I wanted nothing to do with it. I mean, football was my everything. I loved it. I don't know why, but from the first experience I had with it, by far my favorite thing in the world to do. I miss it every single day. And so I put everything I could into it. Even when I went to Princeton, I went to Princeton because I thought, I'm never going to make the pros. I might as well use football to get the best education possible to set me up. It's interesting looking back on it now, Scott, how important it was to me to excel in football in college, even though I was doing it without any expectation for, you know, playing in the pros. I just did it because I wanted to be able to be the best I could be at my favorite thing. It wasn't about any expectation to make money from it or have a career in it. It was, you know, to be the best I could be, to to beat Harvard or beat Yale or whatever it is. But I've always said, if you take just that approach in life, the no regrets approach, think about what's important to you, think about what really matters, and make the decision there to allocate your time in a way that you're not going to have those regrets. But that's a great way to live your life, because you don't want to be that person looking back, reflecting, and saying, I wish I had done this or I wish I had done that.
I think that is an amazing paradigm that we can take, and one that provides us peace no matter what happens, independent of the results.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. I've had a lot of successes, and you pointed some of them out. I've had a lot of failures along the way as well, but I've always taken some comfort in that. Now, sometimes it's sort of it's not as much comfort as I'd like. When I got cut again in the NFL or when whatever happened, but it's a really good thing to be able to lean back on in whatever it is that you're involved in. I think what the important aspect of that might be, Scott, is that you have to take the time to reevaluate what those priorities are, so you know what it is that you don't want to regret, because that changes. Like now, my big thing is I don't want to waste any time, and I certainly don't want to look back and say I wish I'd spent more time with my children or more quality time with my kids. I have 2 little girls now, and so that has become sort of priority one. But then you're balancing that with, all the different jobs I have to try to provide the type of life I want for them. So then, and you'll get into this someday, but you get in sort of the balance of, okay, what is the right balance between having no regrets in terms of the time you spend with your children and no regrets in terms of your professional career and the lifestyle that you're able to provide for them. I think sometimes you also have to make sure that's why you're doing it. I think we're all so driven, and it's so important to all of us to have success. Sometimes you have to take a step back and say, wait a minute, am I doing this for me? Or am I doing this because, it's for the girls, for my daughters to provide the right type of life for them? Or am I just doing this just because I want to do this out of selfish reasons? I think, interestingly enough, those questions, you can always live your life that way. Trying to be the very best you could possibly be at whatever it is you want to be your best at that time, and living your life with no regrets. But what you need to do is you need to adjust what those things are from time to time.
Absolutely, man. I mean, just the idea of constantly calibrating. I was talking to a friend actually yesterday, a podcast episode where, we're so anxious to go fast in our lives. And it's I think about the mapping devices on our phones, right? And how they're constantly telling us to turn and recalibrate and reroute when we make a wrong turn. It's like if you just kept going really fast and thought you're going to get closer to your destination just because the barometer said 80 miles an hour, instead of, the actually rerouting in terms of getting to the place where you ultimately want to be.
Well, that's a pretty good analogy. I never thought of it that way, but that is a pretty good way to look at it. I mean, it's important. I don't think we take enough time in general to take stock of where we are and where we're trying to go. I'm a big to-do list guy. I think a lot of people are, but I think, perhaps we get too into the to-do list and don't spend enough time thinking about the big picture. Even something as simple as, it's very important to me to be a good husband as well. But do we really take the time to sit there, with my wife, and I don't know if it's every quarter or every year, say, how can I be a better father and a better husband? How can I do that? I don't know that we ask ourselves those questions and why we're doing things enough. And I'm a failure at that as much as anybody because I love my to-do list, man, and I derive an irrational amount of pleasure probably from crossing things off that list. But the reality is that list never ends anyway. So I might as well, take stock a little bit more often and make sure that list is actually numbered and prioritized correctly.
That's a great point, and I think it's a valuable exercise for everybody to do. Ross, take me through your why for after football. And, I know that you are now involved in the game in different ways in terms of your podcast and as a commentator, but what was the compelling reason for you to go ahead and try to become the best at that?
What's interesting is because I didn't realize I'd have the physical gifts that I ended up having, I was just a huge, guys I played with in the NFL describe me as a huge fan that just happened to be lucky enough to have the physical gifts to be able to play. So I grew up like racing my dad in the morning to get the local hometown Reading Eagle newspaper. I mean, I always wanted to get into sports media. I always thought that was the career path I'd have growing up. I thought I'd go to Syracuse or a big broadcasting school like that. And then I just became a much better player than I ever thought I would be. And that gave me the opportunity to go to a school, the Ivy League. And then you know the way it is. You don't really talk about media there. Everything's Wall Street finance. So I guess like everybody else, I did the internships and had several Wall Street jobs. My senior year, I accepted a sales and trading job with Lehman Brothers. But then I got signed by the Redskins, and I made the team. And when that happened, I deferred my job with Lehman Brothers for a year. And so then while I was in the NFL, it's interesting, I still didn't think I wanted to get into the media. It didn't really come back to me because that's what every guy in the locker room says they want to do. I want to be a broadcaster. I want to be an announcer. I thought, I can do something else. So every off season, I would have an internship with, Merrill Lynch or Roger Staubach's commercial real estate company. I always treated football as a temp job. I always had an internship in the off season. That didn't mean I put any less time in than the other guys because I didn't. I still put more time in, but my free time was not, playing video games or whatever. My free time was at least a couple days a week putting on a suit and tie and learning, and learning some sort of job, which let me tell you, by the way, and I know thus far you're doing a pretty good job of avoiding the suit and tie office thing as well, but to me, that was unbelievable motivation to keep my football career going as long as possible. To try to avoid that sort of eventual fate. And ironically enough, the NFL decided to have a broadcasting boot camp in 2007, one of their player programs to try to help guys for after their careers. I thought, you know what? I love football so much. I have to be involved in it in some way. I just have to. And, I'd love to coach a local high school team or something, but that takes up a lot of time. At the time, I still thought I'd get involved in a career in finance. I actually had my Series 7 and 66 securities licenses, so I actually thought that would be the route that I would take. So I went to the broadcast boot camp thinking maybe I would just do the Princeton games, just on Saturdays during the season, just as some sort of football outlet. And the boot camp went really well. It turns out that, some people thought I did a good job there. I ended up getting hurt with the Washington Redskins, so I was placed on injured reserve, but I knew my career was over in 2007. And so I was able to get a start right away doing the Princeton games on the radio, number one. And then number two, my experience at the boot camp taught me that, a lot of these guys can talk on TV, some of them can do radio, but that my competitive edge was the writing aspect of it. And I just thought, there aren't really any players that I was aware of at the time that were actually writing, that were actually, everybody gets all their information from the internet, everybody gets all their information from different websites, but there wasn't really anybody that had actually played. It was all beat writers and guys that they couldn't tell you what was really going on. They could write their stories, but we all know what story, and they do a good job and they serve a good purpose. But I just thought that's what could separate me. That's what could differentiate me, and it really has. I think, my niche thus far is that I'm versatile. I can pretty much do every aspect of the media. And then, I'm the quote-unquote smart guy. Even though I don't really feel like I'm using my education necessarily, me having that degree, the Princeton degree, it's more of a brand play than anything else. And so the combination of having gone to Princeton and writing, I currently write for the Sporting News, that sort of cements me or stamps me as the quote-unquote smart football player. And, hey, everybody's got to have something that makes them different. If that's mine, I'm fine with it.
Got it. So I'm curious, do you think that you would have had the success being a color commentator on television like the Yes Network and some of the other stations that you've done if you didn't double down on this unique ability of yours?
Oh, no way. It's amazing how much stuff in my life I owe to the sport of football, and I owe it in large part to being able to play in the NFL. Would I maybe have had a career in broadcasting if I hadn't played in the NFL? I guess potentially. I would have been able to, if I had elected to go the broadcasting route, maybe I would have been a play-by-play guy and had some success in that way. That's certainly possible. But I joke a lot of times, Scott, and say that, God blessed me to be able to play in the NFL for a while just so I could get this broadcasting career. I think it's much more likely that I'd be in finance if I had played in the NFL. The broadcasting career never would have happened. I don't know. I'm a competitive person. I'm sure I'd be doing pretty well. I guess the thing I wonder all the time is where my happiness level would be. I don't really even look at what I do as a job. I guess it is, but I'm just writing and talking about football. At any time I think it's a job even a little bit, I'll go back to what I call 8th grade mode and just be like, dude, are you kidding? And I'll picture my 8th grade self taking my butt, being like, are you really complaining about going to get paid, pretty well to go cover a football game or to go talk about football? Like, get a grip. You're living the dream, dude. So I need to, sometimes, every once in a while, whether it's to travel or whatever, I need to reinforce that. But I'm just incredibly fortunate to be 35 years old and not necessarily feel like I've had a day job. It's all been football, and it's the line between work and pleasure for me is very blurred. In fact, I don't really know where that line is.
Yeah, man. You're in a super interesting position, and I think there's a lot of people out there that give career advice that are paint similar pictures to what you're describing as your career is. Follow what you love, do what you love. If it doesn't feel like work, you never work a day in your life. But do you think that is a realistic approach for somebody that isn't necessarily doesn't have their passion or interest tied to something like the NFL and doesn't necessarily have the experience and credentials that allow you to be in this unique position?
Yeah, I think it's an easy thing to say, and I think there's some truth to it. But it really depends on what your personal situation is, which is why, probably the younger the listener right now, the better. Most of the time, whatever it is that you're really into, that you're really passionate about, odds are there's going to be a decent amount of people that are pretty passionate and into that as well. And what I've learned, whether it's people with no backgrounds whatsoever that somehow get into the football business, which is really impressive, guys to me that didn't even play, that find a way into scouting or broadcasting or coaching or whatever, or even the guys that are the most successful. What I've learned, and sort of something to live by, is that you have no shot unless it's more important to you than it is to anybody else. So, a lot of these teams, they'll have a bunch of summer interns, and, they'll have 8 summer interns in the marketing department at training camp or whatever. And I tell those kids, they don't even realize it, but you're being evaluated. The odds are they'll probably hire one of you at the end of this. So you got to be the best one. So whatever that is, you've got to make the impression. You've got to be the best one. I can't tell you how many people have gotten jobs, and really it started by banging doors and being willing to work long hours for no pay, which is crazy, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. It's not a smart trade. It's not a smart thing to do. But it was that important to them. They care about it that much. It's that much of a passion. And so those are the ones that end up getting the entry-level jobs. And the reality is it kind of weeds itself out, because the people that aren't willing to do those things, they're not going to get those jobs. So whatever industry it is that you want to be in, whatever it is, go talk to people that are already in that industry and tell them about your passion, and tell them you're willing to work for free. You're willing to do whatever it takes to get your foot in the door. Very rarely are people going to turn away free labor. And once you get in there, you can find a way to provide value. Now, if you cannot do that financially, then you have to find a way to do that part-time. I mean, Mike McCarthy, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, was a volunteer coach for no money, and then at night he was a toll booth collector because he could work the graveyard shift and make some money doing that before he'd come back and go back to coaching. So he didn't get very much sleep, but he showed he had that passion. So you're right. On some level, it's easier said than done. I will say this, I'm not a big fan of the word realistic, because I don't think it was realistic my junior year of high school to think about NFL career. I don't think it was realistic maybe even my sophomore year of college to think about NFL career. And I've always said, how do you know what is or isn't realistic unless you attempt to accomplish it, believing 100% that you can? Just like I'm not a big fan of the word potential either. Now that I've got kids, you hear all these parents all the time, my son has so much potential, blah, blah, blah. When I hear potential, I just hear you haven't done it yet. Potential means nothing to me. I mean, potential just means, potential is a made-up word by parents to make themselves feel better. So often, Scott, I've had parents say, my son has all this potential as a football player usually. Could you talk to him? Could you just tell? And I always say no. And they say, really? I said, yeah, to be honest with you, I could, but, the odds are it might have a short-term impact, but the reality is that if it's not self-motivated, if your son's not a self-starter, if it's not in him already to do it, then it's not going to work anyway. It's just not going to, I mean, my parents, Scott, had to calm me down. I told you that earlier. I mean, they had to tell me to relax, to not get up at 5 o'clock every morning when I was 14 years old, to not, jog to high school every day, dribbling a basketball so I could get my dribbling work in and shower. I mean, I'm not normal. I recognize that. I don't really know where it came from. Every once in a while, I wish that I wasn't this way, but 99% of the time, I'm very happy that I am.
Ross, let me ask you, because I think there's a lot of people out there that might have been told that they have a lot of potential for their lives or their businesses or whatever their pursuits are. And a lot of these people have yet to seize that quote unquote potential. What would you tell these people that feel like they haven't yet stepped into their greatness?
I would tell them that you never know when the opportunity is going to happen, but it's your job to keep fighting until it does. If I went down the line, I mean, literally, like every media job I have, the business, Go Big Recruiting that I started, the podcast, if I even told you all the stories, I mean, so my first big break in media was writing a column for Peter King at Sports Illustrated. He writes the Monday Morning Quarterback at SI.com. And what happened is he happened to be one day at Redskin Park. And this is April, May, or June. He was there writing a story around the draft. And I knew he was this big writer. And that's when I kind of had the idea of writing and thinking that writing, could be a differentiating factor for me. And I'm walking out of the facility and I look over and I see Peter King. And I literally, Scott, I paused and I could have kept walking out that, he's typing, he's busy. I thought, no, you know what? I'm going to introduce myself. So I did. I walked into the press room and I said, hey, Peter, I'm Ross Tucker. I just wanted to say hi. He said, hey, how are you, Ross? I said, I really enjoy your stuff. Here's the idea I had. I used to write a bunch of politics papers at Princeton. I'd love to write on the NFL. I think I could add really a lot of extra insight. He said, you know what? That would be awesome. I think it's a great idea. You could write things that nobody else could. I want you to take notes on training camp, on everything that happens, and then I'll have you, no matter how it goes, I'll have you write something for the Monday Morning Quarterback. So that was that break. I mean, it just so happened for the Yes Network that they needed somebody because they were doing Ivy League games on TV. So they asked around, and I think Peter King and somebody mentioned my name. And so that's how I got that gig. I mean, literally, you go right down the line. Go Big Recruiting, my business. That's a high school recruiting service for athletes. I always had the idea, Scott. I was at a wedding for a Redskins teammate, and there was a guy at the wedding, and I said, what do you do for a living? He said, I'm an internet video expert. And I told him my idea about Go Big Recruiting. I'd always had this idea, but I never really acted on it. And he said, I can do that. We should do that. I said, okay, Graham, you're at a wedding. Who knows? And he called me on Monday. I said, yeah, okay, whatever. He called me again on Wednesday and said, let's do this. I thought, all right. So, I mean, most of the things in my life, I can tell you sort of the unique set of circumstances that happened that enabled me to get that opportunity. It's not all a meritocracy at all. Now, once you actually do it or start it, it is a meritocracy. At that point, it's what you do at that point. But getting that initial opportunity, a lot of times it is a matter of chance. It's timing. It's right place, the right time. I mean, I say off, I probably would have only made 2 or 3 of the 32, or I guess 31 at the time, NFL teams when I was a rookie, but I just happened to sign with one of those 2 or 3. You never really know what opportunities are going to be there and what opportunities are going to come to you in life, but you have to try to seize on any and all. Any contact you have, anybody you know in the industry, cash it in. Make that call. Do everything you can, because you never know which one's going to be the one that kind of gets the ball rolling. And then once you get the ball rolling, it's like a snowball going downhill.
Yeah, it makes total sense, man. I mean, I'm a big believer in leaving no stone unturned, in constantly looking to provide value in as many ways to as many people as possible, because you never know what opportunities are going to arise. And I guess I'm just really curious to learn about, because I think there are a ton of different opportunities out there, but I also think it can be a challenge in terms of trying to do everything and anything. And you're a guy who has this podcast, you've done Sirius Radio, color commentary, you have your own technology business. You probably have a lot of opportunities coming your way at this point. And I'm curious, like, how do you prioritize? Which ones do you choose? How can you consistently attract new opportunities, but make sure that you're doubling down on the right ones?
That's a really, really good question. Because I think you can spread yourself too thin. And I think, sort of like we were talking earlier about recalibrating your priorities in life, I think you need to recalibrate what you're putting your time into and how that's going for you. And always be open to new opportunities, and that might mean dropping another one that you've been working on for a while. It's not an easy question to answer, and I think the only answer is to do your due diligence. You know, with all the different media gigs I have, to be honest with you, I look at them as being all in the same bucket. I mean, whether it's a game analyst or radio or studio analyst, you know, I think most guys in the media, or even writing, most guys in the media are sort of hustling and trying to get as many gigs like that as they can. I think what makes me unique is that, you know, I started to go big recruiting, which is a little bit different, but, you know, the media is so, there's such a lack of security there. It's so year to year that I always want to have something else going on business-wise. And so that's been the high school recruiting space for me, and Go Big Recruiting. The interesting thing to me, and what it has become a high priority, is the podcast, the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. I take it real seriously, because it's the one media venture that I really have control over and ownership over. All the other stuff is great, right? NBC and Sporting News and Sirius XM and the Yes Network, but ultimately those are 1- and 2-year contracts, and I'm a W-2 employee, and there's a cap really on what I can accomplish in that regard. And there's an inherent lack of security. There's definitely a cap on what the compensation can be. But the podcast is much different. I mean, the podcast, sort of the world's my oyster, and I can make that whatever I want to make that, or at least can try, and try to build that and provide value for me. So I own that. So that's a priority, is to try to grow the podcast. I actually do a large percentage of the sales for my podcast with the advertisers that I met when I was doing the podcast at ESPN, which, by the way, is another great example, Scott. I mean, I was writing for Sports Illustrated. ESPN asked me if I'd write for them. I said, sure. They said, do you want to, we'd like you to host our podcast, too. I said, sure, that sounds great. I literally did not even know what a podcast was. So then I started to become the podcast host for them, which went really well. So that's another one. That's another one where I just kind of fell into it. I'm not an iPad guy, at least I wasn't before. So I had no idea what I was getting into. And then while I'm there, I'm at ESPN, and I'm starting to realize, the money that's being made by them and the opportunity that would be there if I went out on my own. So I think a lot of it is right place, right time, good fortune is the first part of that equation. The second part of the equation is recognizing the opportunity and then acting on it by going out on my own and launching my podcast at rosstucker.com and kind of having the guts to say, I can do this on my own. I'm going to do this on my own. And for your listeners, it's got to be the right opportunity. You don't want to just leave a good job you have if you're not sure, if you haven't done the diligence, if you don't have a good business plan. But if you do have the financial flexibility and you do have the opportunity to control your own destiny, yes, there's some risk there, but I believe 9 times out of 10, the potential reward far outweighs the risk, especially the younger you are, depending again on your family situation and financial situation.
Yeah, dude. And I mean, for me, half of the reward in seeking out these experiences is purely just to have the reference experience of what that particular pursuit is like and knowing that I tried, right? Because I think a larger theme in this conversation is like no regrets. And the worst thing, and one of the biggest fears that I personally have, it sounds like you might feel the same way, is sitting back, looking at my life and thinking, man, I wish I would have done X.
It's 100% accurate. I hope, sometimes I pray that as few people feel that as possible, because that would be an absolutely awful feeling. And you only get one shot, especially when you're young, but there's never a time where you can't launch a new business or a new venture. You just have to decide that it's important enough to you. Now, even if you keep your day job, so to speak, and you start putting in time at night, and you start doing things on the weekend, you can do it. I mean, I've got a buddy of mine that has a consulting job, but he has started a real estate business, flipping houses. That's going well for him, and he wants to get that to the point where that's what he's doing full time. My sister is in pharmaceutical sales. She also launched an interior design business on the side that she mainly does for friends and family at night and on the weekend. She's trying to grow that to the point where that's what she does all the time, and she can control her own destiny and own it that way. I think it's very rare that you don't have the time to at least take that first step in whatever it is that you think you might want to do. It's really about time equity. Now, are you potentially sacrificing time with your family or friends? Yeah, but people do that to go to get their MBA at night. I mean, you make sacrifices when you believe that potential reward at the end is worth it. And I think a lot of times, even if you fail, there's a reward in knowing that you tried and did everything. There's a large group of people that are so afraid of failing that they never try. I'm so afraid of not trying.
That's some powerful stuff, man. I feel like you're the type of guy that really just takes control of his life. So I'm dying to know, man, what can we expect out of Ross Tucker in the next 5 years?
Wow. My wife now might actually download this podcast to listen. I think what I'm looking for, Scott, is to try to simplify it. I'm looking for more K1s and less W2s. W2 where I'm an employee getting paid, that's great. And I make a really nice living. And I'm really proud of that and happy with that. But the control and the value in life, I think, comes from a couple things. Number one, from making money even though you're not putting in a ton of time. So if you can get a venture to that point, whether it's a franchise, something I'm looking into, based on where I live is a car wash. I want more businesses. I talked to you about some of the awesome things you've got going. I'm really into residual income. I'm really into, putting down an upfront investment in money and in time, and then having money continually to come in. So I've thought about franchising opportunities. I've looked into them a little bit. I've looked into car wash a little bit. I have not seen an opportunity that I like enough that I'm willing to drop some of the other things that I'm doing and go all in on that. I have not seen that yet, but if you were to keep tabs on me, my guess is, well, I know for a fact I'll be spending more time on things I have ownership in over the next 5 years, and my guess is that by 5 years from now, there'll probably be one other thing that is passive income in nature that I'll have my hands in, because, man, it's powerful to be having money coming in while you're able to do the things that you truly enjoy. And I'm in a place now, financially, where I can really do that a little bit. I can do that, which is kind of exciting. The key, though, I think, is going to be picking the right thing. And there's also, I don't want people to get the impression, Scott, that it's go, go, go. I think that there's value in waiting for the right opportunity as long as you're continuing to look. I'm okay with you saying no and no and no, as long as you're still working towards saying yes when you get to that right opportunity.
I love it, man. And I'm on your, I'm rowing in the same direction, brother, in terms of focusing on creating assets that ultimately provide abundance for yourself and the people that you care about. Dude, so I always like to finish the show with one question that is the name of this show. And that is, if you could give everybody listening out there one piece of advice to get an edge in their business and life, what would that be?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we've hit on a lot of them. I think the biggest thing that I would say is probably twofold. Number one, anything and everything could be an opportunity. So keep your eyes open. You never know when they're going to come. I didn't know when I went to Bucknell to visit my buddies that that's when I would meet my wife. So I would say, number one, when in doubt, do it. Whether it's some networking event, when it's some networking event, some trip, some blind date, whatever it is, when in doubt, do it. And I actually gave the commencement address at my high school a couple years ago, and that was the advice I gave, and then the parents looked at me horrified. But my advice was, when in doubt, do it. You're much, much more likely to regret not having done something than you are to regret having done it. I mean, what's the worst case scenario? You don't have a great experience. You can leave the networking event early, or, okay, it's a bad date. It's much better than potentially missing out on what might have been an awesome date. I mean, if you turn down something, you might be turning down the party where you're going to meet your business partner. That's going to change your life. You might be missing out on, meeting your wife, or whatever the case might be. So number one, opportunity can be everywhere. So when in doubt, say yes. And number two, if you're not willing and able to do the things that other people are not able to, then that's not the industry for you. Because I just don't see that many people having success unless they're willing to put in the time and the energy and the passion to do the things that other people are either unwilling or unable to do. So think about it. I mean, if you want to get into, let's say you want to get into coaching, and you do some internship or you go somewhere and you see these other guys are willing to spend crazy hours. You're just like, man, those guys are crazy. I would never do that. But then that might not be for you, because those guys are willing to do things that you are not able to do. Find the thing that you are willing and able to do harder and more than everybody else. That's your thing. That's your niche. That's your industry.
I love it, man. I'm fired up as we close this interview here. Tell everyone, Ross, where can people go to listen to your podcast, to learn more about you and all the different things that you're involved in?
Yeah, I mean, I would just go to rosstucker.com. I got all the gigs I have up there. And most importantly, I'd really encourage you to give the Ross Tucker Football Podcast a shot, especially if you're into football. But even if you're not, I think you'd really, really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. It's only about 30 minutes. You'll learn, you'll laugh, you won't cry, but it sounds better if I say you'll cry as well. No, but you'll learn, you'll laugh. It's a really good experience. I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoy it. And if you're into this, I think you'd be into learning about the business of football, the mechanics of football, and some of the great entrepreneurial type stories in football. So the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, rosstucker.com, and of course, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, everywhere podcasts are found. And all the other stuff I do, all the other jobs, you can see me on NBC, Sports Network, Sirius XM, Sporting News. But don't worry about that stuff because, like I said, those are W-2 things. So just download the podcast. Just subscribe to the podcast. And if you catch me on one of the other things, that's great. If not, that's fine too.
Love it, Ross. All right, man. Thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Before we finish up with today's Mindshare, I just want to say thanks for listening to another episode of The Competitive Edge. If you enjoyed the ideas in this episode and want access to all the conversations, tactics, and Mindshares we'll be sharing in the future, the best thing you can do is subscribe to The Competitive Edge on iTunes. And while you're there, if you felt like this show has made a positive impact on your day, it'd be great if you could leave us a review on iTunes as well. Now, I know we covered a lot in this episode, and there might be a few key ideas or tools that you want to remember. So we went ahead and compiled all of the notes, links, and even a full searchable transcript of this conversation for you on lifelonglearner.com. That's life-longlearner.com. I also want to give you the details on a cool contest I'm running right now at lifelonglearner.com/fun. By entering the contest, you'll have a chance to win everything from Amazon gift cards to a free month of having your very own dedicated virtual assistant to an opportunity to come and hang out with me and my buds for a few days, where we'll teach you how to create your very own passive income stream. To enter this contest and learn more about everything we're giving away, head on over to lifelonglearner.com/fun. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that inspiring message from Ross. He is an awesome dude, and I definitely recommend going and checking out his podcast if you're into pro football. And today, Mindshare, I thought I'd tell a little bit of a story and from my personal life that kind of touches upon this point of how to live without regrets. My freshman year playing football, I was fortunate enough to get some playing time and ultimately be one of the only guys who actually got to see the field on defense and on special teams. And unfortunately, in my sixth game, I ended up tearing my ACL. I'd never been injured in my entire life, and to have something like this that put me out for a year was really tough. It was really, really hard for me to deal with. And honestly, when I came back, I wasn't the same player. I wasn't as explosive. I wasn't as fast. And ultimately, my senior year, I ended up tearing my ACL again of my other knee, which was really, really hard. And after I tore that second ACL, and even after I came back the first time, I had a few friends be pretty candid and sit down with me and say, like, Scott, dude, aren't you upset how do you feel that, you have a knee brace on, maybe you weren't as fast after that first go round? And honestly, I felt totally at peace. And the reason that I did was because for the 9-month rehabilitation program, I didn't skip a single repetition of one set of one exercise for 9 months. I mean, it must have been thousands and thousands of reps. I didn't skip one thing. I rehabbed and stretched the hardest I possibly could. Because if I came back and was less of a player than I was before, I never wanted to look back and say, wow, I wish I could have done more. Because truthfully, that would have haunted me way worse than not being the player that I was. Because I would have known that maybe that thing that was in my control could have been the difference. And, the same thing happened my senior year when I tore my other ACL and my career ended. Like, I just felt blessed and happy. Sure, I was sad for a day or two, but I'd given every single thing that I had, and that allowed me to have peace independent of the result. So I guess the message today for people listening is whatever it is that you're attempting to do, if you really want to safeguard yourself from regret, ask yourself the type of effort that you're giving. Are you giving a mighty no regrets effort? Or are you even focused on effort? Another thing we talked about in the Jerry Colonna episode was, making it more about the process and having a hell of a time as an entrepreneur or in whatever pursuit we're doing so that the actual reward is the process itself. For me, these two mindsets for a longer period of my life, definitely the mighty effort one, have just been powerful tools to allow me to do things and feel good independent of the result. So take a look at whatever it is that you're going through today and ask yourself, am I giving the type of result? Am I giving the type of effort that regardless of the result, I'm going to feel good about this experience because I know that I gave it all that I had. I hope this message inspires you today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Competitive Edge. Tools to allow me to do things and feel good independent of the result. So take a look at whatever it is that you're going through today and ask yourself, am I giving the type of result? Am I giving the type of effort that regardless of the result, I'm going to feel good about this experience because I know that I gave it all that I had. I hope this message inspires you today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Competitive Edge.